Yeah, speaking of high level player for the Bills, Tremaine Edmonds put together his best year as a Buffalo Bill
Great timing for him.
in the contract year.
Great.
Yeah, he and ka-ching,
Well
right?
done for him. Yeah.
Yeah, and so we're happy for him. Why? Because much like Poyer was a vet when he came to the Bills, but he was a foundational piece to help set the culture, help set the defense and what they wanted to do on that side of the ball. Tremaine Edmonds was very much in that same way, but a lot greener behind the ears, a lot younger when it comes
He's
to
still only
playing in the
15
NFL.
years old.
I know, right? Even Kendall's older than
Yeah.
him. Uh, so obviously Tremaine Edmonds put together a really great year. So listen to some of these stats. So when we're talking pass defense from an individual standpoint, he was number 3 in EPA per target. And number 1 was Milano. So he's number 3 overall in EPA per target. Let's see if I could bring that up here. Courtesy of Sports Info Solutions. So anytime that they targeted him, you can see EPA per target is right here. He was 3rd overall. Milano was number 1. Jermaine Pratt was number 2. Yes, he was ahead of Fred Warner, Levante David, and some really good names on that list. He was number 2 in QB rating against, behind Fred Warner, but also in front of Matt Milano. Number 4 in yards per attempt against at 3.9. According to PFF, he was number 1 in pass breakups last year with 10. If you flip it to the run defense, he was 12th in average tackle versus the run, average depth of tackle at 2 yards, which was tied with Fred Warner. Milano was 10th at 1.9. So just some stats to kind of give you a frame of reference on Tremaine Edmonds this season. But when we talk about, his development over the years, a lot of people will say, yeah, this is his best year. I thought 2019, he had a really good year too. But it's overall been a slow burn and overall, a relatively slow development. But when you consider the age thing, that obviously plays a part when you're talking mental capabilities.
Yeah.
And the responsibilities that this staff put on Tremaine. We talk about Poyer being the eyes and ears on the back and being a coach on the field. And when we talked about the checks and audibles and setting the defense, that actually started with Tremaine Edmonds.
He bears a ton of mental and physical responsibility in this defense. So you start from the mental standpoint. Yeah, like he is constantly setting fronts and being that linchpin between the front and the back end in terms of getting everybody set from a coverage standpoint based on offensive personnel and alignments.
Yeah.
And then from the physicality standpoint, like we talked about all episode, the Bills defense is a nickel defense. And it's a pass first league, but you still have vulnerability against the run if you are a nickel defense and a light box defense like the Bills are. So Edmonds and Milano are constantly caught in between in terms of having to be those coverage pieces on the back end, but also having to be responsible for fitting the run up front, let alone having to function in coverage vertically or horizontally, side to side. And I love the slow burn piece you mentioned about Tremaine Edmonds. So this is a testament to Tremaine Edmonds and a little bit to Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. But the Bills' pass defense from a DVOA standpoint in the middle of the field, in 2019, they were 21st. In 2020, they were 13th. In 2021, they were first, and 2022, they were second. So as Tremaine Edmonds has progressed, this Bills defense in the middle of the field has gotten better in pass coverage. I think that's no coincidence. And I also think it's no coincidence that we saw him perform better this year with the addition of a player with a skill set and a body type like Daquan Jones to allow him to stay clean against opposing offensive linemen, allow him to play fast instead of having to process and get in the weeds so much of having to shed blocks.
Yeah, he's come a long way when it comes to making plays on the ball and those splash plays. And everyone wanted to see that from him more, right? Like that was a thing that everyone was preaching in the prior off seasons. Even McDermott had mentioned it in one of the pressers. I don't know if it was the last offseason or the season before. He wanted Tremaine Edmonds to get wet, to make those splash plays and just go play fast. And I mean, this year he made those plays. And as you said in those DVOA numbers, like he was an important piece over the middle field. We're going to take a look at some of those plays in the film room, but to see how much better he's gotten at acquiring targets through his zone, passing through his zone, and just flipping his hips and going and running with them, that has probably been the biggest thing that I've seen when it comes to his development. Yes, he's gotten better with the angles and some in the run game and some of the big hits and kind of, inserting his will on others, especially because of his size and makeup. But to me, it was acquiring those targets, running through his zone and running with them and taking them away as options. That was the biggest improvement for me when it came to Tremaine Edmonds. And again, this is his best season, and it's gonna make him a lot of money. Yeah. So Greg had put together a projection for him, and AAV wise, each year it's going to come down to probably right around 17.5 million. And you can see it's a 6-year, 105 million projection from Greg. Most of that money doesn't hit until like 2025. You see that salary cap hit the first couple of years. It's 7 million next season, 9 million in 2024, and then 18.5 million in 2025, which coincidentally enough is when Milano's contract is up. So, and his contract, I think he'll be 30 years old at that moment. And how old's Tremaine going to be? Still
17.
Again, yeah, exactly. So I think a lot of us talked about, hey, give him some time in that slow development because he's young. But I honestly think we talked about this in Mobile. His age may be more important when it comes to this contract. When they drafted him, if all things were correct and they developed him properly and they got to the end of this contract, I think the age thing played a bigger part when it came to structuring that contract. And especially because they knew Josh and him were going to come up at the same time. I think that this part of the age discussion was more important than, hey, it's going to take him a few years to develop because of that age. I think this contract thing is huge. 6 years, you can do that because of how young he is.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's willing to do that as well, because when he gets out of that contract, he has the potential to sign another significant contract. Yes. So it works for the team and it also works for the player. It honestly speaks to both sides. Again, we talked about it in Mobile. I don't see Tremaine Edmonds leaving. I think the Bills anticipated this. They know his importance. And then from a contract standpoint, I think they would have had to have had this plan. Unless somebody comes out and wants to use him to reset the market, which I guess in theory could happen, especially with how he's viewed. Even when Billsmafia was knocking Tremaine Edmonds, you had guys like Robert Saleh and Bill Belichick talking about how great Tremaine Edmonds is. So he's well respected across the league. But yeah, he could definitely sign that deal, and it could be work from a Bill standpoint, but also for him because he can sign. This isn't the last deal, the last big contract he'll ever get because of how young he is, all jokes aside.
Yeah, and you mentioned Belichick and Saleh, praising him for what he brings on the field, especially physically. Well, that's a great segue because here is Saleh talking about Tremaine Edmonds, and I love what he calls him here because we call him the pterodactyl a lot, because of his length and how big he is. But listen to Saleh's comments from, I think it was a year or two ago.
So, it's interesting, Avatar, that's Tremaine. He's
Avatar.
He's like a unicorn in the linebacker world. I mean, the guy's 6'5". He's got ridiculous length, speed, range, knockback. He's got all of it. There isn't anything he doesn't have. So he is special in every sense of the imagination. The amount of space he takes away just by his mere presence in the middle of the field is unlike anything that's been seen in a very long time. I think Urlacher would probably be one of those guys. So, it's interesting.
You got to think about Saleh's background too, and where he came from and who he's worked with. He obviously is a defensive mind and a really good one. Unfortunately, he's in the division with the Bills. But he's been around some talented defensive players, and for him to talk that glowingly about Tremaine, he's not just puffing out, and just gloating about Tremaine. He's honestly telling you how he feels about Tremaine and how he would love to have a guy like Tremaine, whereas a lot of Bills fans, they would be like, they would be happy if Tremaine wasn't on the team. It's just so hard to picture this defense without Maine in it.
And that's from a guy who helped Fred Warner become Fred Warner in San Francisco. And so he knows what good linebacker play is. But he hit on a point just with his size. Even if he just on the snap just stood there in the middle of the field, he's a deterrent because of his size and his wingspan. But then you add that in, Eric, with what you mentioned, leading up to this clip, his effectiveness against the pass this year from a route collecting standpoint, his ability to read the route distribution, his ability to swivel the hips and just match whoever comes into his zone. It could be a slot receiver, it could be a tight end. And this isn't something new for us. We showed whichever game it was last year versus Kansas City where he collects Mecole Hardman and runs with him down the field. And
Yeah.
Mecole Hardman runs like a 4.3 840. But he took it to another level this year in terms of reading the route distribution and his ability to function in the middle of the field. And this clip is a great example of his ability to robot, as you say, and pick up this over.
Yeah, and this is the interception that ends up going to Poyer. But the recognition, this is a play they had run earlier in the game, and he recognizes that play action pass there, and they're trying to slip Robert Woods right here on that over route. You see him, again, turn and locate. Robot, turn and locate. Get on him, and you're not in phase, but you got to remember you're undercutting that. And look at Milano. This is technically where Milano's space is supposed to be. He's supposed to be deterring this throw. But Edmonds is not totally in phase, but he plays perfectly underneath that route, gets his eye on the wide receiver, then on the ball, gets a piece of it, and it ends up in Poyer's hands for the interception. Just phenomenal stuff. Great recognition from play to play, from drive to drive. Robot right there, technique. Again, my favorite improvement of Tremaine's the last couple of years.
And this one's a nice one too, because you see the coverage ability from a read and reaction standpoint. And then you also see like the processing standpoint, his ability to recognize what's going on, his ability to get his eyes on Bobby Trees and pick him up and carry him. But then again, you see at the end, the physical piece. This play is a microcosm of who he is, the range, the athleticism, the processing, and then the physical God-given pterodactyl wings. Like he gets his fingers on this ball, which leads to the deflection, which leads to the interception. And this isn't just saying it because, he's a Buffalo Bill. I don't know if another linebacker is making that play because they don't have the wingspan that he has. Like maybe they have the speed, but they don't have the reach. Maybe they have the reach, but they don't have the speed and the range. Like he's one of very, very, very few that can make this play. That's why Robert Saleh called him a unicorn. Like this play is just all of that in one: the size, the speed, the range, the mental processing, the recognition. And this is also why, whether you're looking towards the draft or free agency, it's not easy to replace a guy like this, a guy who can function in the middle with this size and this speed and this recognition and the ability to match coverage, which is hard for anyone, let alone a linebacker. Like it's not easy to replace someone who has to occupy this role and who occupies it to the level that Tremaine Edmonds does.
Yeah, we talk about shutting down the middle of the field. When you play those two high safety looks, the weakness is outside, down the middle of the field, right? And when you play those two high safety looks, you're underneath defenders like Tremaine Edmonds. Their ability to shut down the middle of the field has a lot to do with that range and athleticism. You see it here. He's carrying Adam Thielen down the field on an over route, flips those hips and finds that target, and then makes a play at the catch point. Again, he did this. He's done this well over the last few years, but this year, the consistency of finding that guy going over the middle on those over routes or screaming down the middle of the field versus those two high looks, he stepped it up another level this year. And it was just great to see that it caused turnovers too, not just incompletions, but also turnovers.
He's so mad at himself on this one because he dropped that interception that was right in his hands. He had a couple plays like this where he broke on the ball in this game and just had a bunch of splash plays in this one from a PBU standpoint. He should have came down with it. But again, that's the functionality of his recognition, his skill set, his ability, his athleticism, the wingspan, all those pieces. And that's also, again, tied into what the Bills are able to do coverage-wise. The reason the Tampa 2 became the Tampa 2 is because the Buccaneers had a guy like Derek Brooks. The reason the reason the Chicago Bears were able to take the Tampa 2 and add on to it, because they had Lance Briggs, but also a guy named Brian Urlacher that Robert Saleh mentioned, who had the ability to play that deep middle third and be able to carry guys. Edmonds allows them to do that, whether it's a too high look in cover 2 or a too high look in cover 4. It's just, he's rare. He's rare, and it's hard to replace rare.
Yeah, I mean, whether they're in zone or they're pattern matching, you can see he just distributes the coverage so well, gets on the hip of that defender or that tight end down the middle of the field, and makes another play at the catch point. Just so much fun to watch a linebacker do that, week in and week out. It just opens up the defensive playbook, and you can see that the middle of the field is wide open. I mean, it's there, but he's able to, with his range, cover that up and shut it down versus, quarterbacks that can fit it in there. Aaron Rodgers could fit that in there quite easily, but Edmonds is there with his range, athleticism, and length at the catch point to to break it up there, Anthony. Just, again, week in and week out. But this was an area that, aside from making plays on the ball, big hits and really, showing that dominance and that size. This was one of those plays this year, because we saw it a lot more than prior years, where Edmonds, was lighting people up, and especially running backs. You see him work over the top of the rub route, and then just lays out the running back on that little wheel route of the sideline on third down.
Poor Sylvan Ahmed just gets absolutely crushed. And again, this is what the naysayers or the detractors, or even some of the fans of Tremaine Edmonds, have wanted him to do, like interceptions, pass breakups, sacks, or big hits, just using that size. And this one was beautiful. Again, the recognition, the ability to get through the traffic and just work over the top, but then he has the closing speed to be able to work over the top and then get back down onto the running back. If he doesn't have the angle that he takes or the speed, Ahmed potentially gets this ball and has a couple seconds to potentially make a move on the linebacker, but Edmonds closes him down so quickly while working over the top, there's nowhere to go. And then he separates him from the football, crushes him, and you see the appreciation from the sideline on this one. That's always a big one. Like when you see the sideline get up or get out of their seats, something big or something great happened, because the real recognize real, and the players recognize it on this one. That this Autumn says, some say Ahmed's soul is still on the field from that hit. That's a fair point. Edmonds just detonated on him. Again, like you said, this was third down. This wasn't, at a point that didn't matter or early in the game. Like, this was a nice tone setting moment in a high leverage situation. Really good play from Tremaine Edmonds.
Yeah, and he was making those plays on those critical downs, those money downs. And so I talked about, there was an improvement with him against the run, firing downhill, but more importantly, his angles on these, perimeter runs. You could see him scraping down from depth, slowly creeping down towards the line of scrimmage, but also leveraging left to right on the screen here against a really good running back. And then again, that's a pretty good lick right there. He gets on Stevenson at the end there, as he and Rousseau meet at the running back. So again, I think a lot of fans, when they knock Tremaine Edmonds, it's because of the run game, but we know that his coverage skills are way more important, and the passing game and defending the pass is really where the NFL is. So I can live with some blown run fits here and there, but I did see an improvement in this area, and along with the pass coverage stuff.
Yes, his value in the pass game is so tremendously important that I don't want to say it cancels out or negates any failures in the run game, but it does mitigate any failures in the run game to a degree. But like you said, we saw an uptick in his pass coverage performance this year, but also in his ability to come forward. And yeah, he sticks Ramondre Stevenson here. Stevenson is listed at 6 feet, 227 pounds. He's a stout dude. Like, people don't really rock him like that. And Edmonds gets low, puts a good hit, but it's, you mentioned it's the way he plays this. Like, if he over pursues, you have the opportunity for a cutback from Ramondre Stevenson. Instead, he plays this in tandem with Matt Milano. Matt Milano takes the outside. Stevenson is forced to cut up into the alley. Rousseau closes down. You see that alley, formed right there from the two lines you got, and Edmonds fills it and makes the play. We saw more of that this year than I think we have in years past. I think that's part of the reason why fans have kind of woken up a little bit to his play, and why a lot of people now are clamoring for him to be re-signed, lo and behold, as we've come full circle here, because he started to make more of those plays in the run game. And if the defensive line continues to function as it can, and this isn't just a Tremaine Edmonds thing, no linebacker can function if the defensive line doesn't do their job. If anybody watched 30 for 30 on Bullies in Baltimore, who played in front of Ray Lewis? Sam Adams and Tony Saragusa.
The Goose.
Boom. And then his production dipped a little bit. And when did it go back up? When they brought in Haloti Nada. Like, there's a reason why space eaters and functional defensive line play usually works in tandem, or there's some sort of I don't want to say a causation, but correlation between the defensive line and good linebacker play. We saw some additions that worked, and you couple that with Tremaine Edmonds' ascension mentally and physically in several areas. And yeah, he balled out this year. Like we said, in perfect time for him to hit the open market and potentially cash in. Not a big deal.